Unlike other mediums, be it movies or television, developers and publishers using little white lies to sell their products has become the norm in video games. In their defense though, saying one thing and doing another isn't always their fault, as the shifting nature of video game development means that features are constantly changed, cut, and sometimes saved for the sequel because of time constraints. Still, while changes are excusable, it's an entirely different beast when developers straight up lie to your face, promising you X and giving you Y. And yeah, the bait and switch tactic can be used to good effect. Just look at Metal Gear Solid 2 for a good example of that. But more often than not, it's done to sell you a game that seems to be far better than it actually is. I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are 8 times video game developers lied straight to your face.
But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to stay notified. Ding, ding, done.
Number 8. Star Wars KINECT'S lightsaber duels. Though we know now that even with 2 attempts, Microsoft would never be able to harness the full potential of their Kinect, one game which promised to do just that back in the day was Kinect Star Wars. And yeah, the early trailers didn't look all that impressive, but they did promise an experience where you could become a Jedi, getting into lightsaber duels and taking out armies of droids using only the Force, all without a controller. Unfortunately, the end result didn't end up playing anywhere near as smooth as even these rudimentary trailers would have you believe. Sure, you could fling a lightsaber about and hope to have some fun, but even that was only a small fraction of the overall experience, and even that didn't live up to the promise of the trailers. Everyone came to Kinect Star Wars for epic lightsaber duels, but in reality, the most functioning minigame in that collection was a Just Dance ripoff, which almost single-handedly ruined Star Wars. Oh, who am I kidding? We all love to bop to I'm Solo now and again. Number 7. Halo 5's Hunt the Truth trailers. The lies surrounding Halo 5 started pretty much as soon as it was first announced. The initial trailer, which showed Master Chief wandering around a desert, had no real relevance to the end game, nor did the ads promising that players would be hunting the truth. Showing events from the perspectives of both the Chief and new character Locke, both outcomes ended in an execution in a decimated city. All the while, the USNC's Infinity exploded in the sky. It was a glorious scene. Likewise, although the Chief was set up as a villain in these ads on the assumption that he committed a monstrous crime, this relationship isn't really explored in the finished game, at least not in the way these trailers suggested. Nothing that was promised actually ended up happening in the story, and fans were left wondering just how the final game ended up being so radically different from its pre-release hype. Number 6. Fable's Realistic World. A list about video game developers lying would have never been complete without Peter Molyneux. Admittedly, it was never done in a malicious way, and you could tell that Molyneux always wanted to include the ideas he had for his projects in the finished game. It's just that you could also tell that his ambitions never quite lined up with the realities of video game production. However, while he has always been bad...
Right, look, mate, you're going to have to wrap it up because we need this for football stuff now, none of this nerd.
Oh, brilliant, here we go. Sorry.
What is it?
It's the video games, we need to do the football.
Like gaming, mate.
What's happening like?
Proper sport, football.
Messi's going to Milan.
Oh, what? Messi's going to Milan?
Exactly.
Oh, you're right. Anyway, getting over that interruption, while he's always been a bit of a liar, his reputation as a fibber was properly cemented during the production of the original Fable. Constantly talking up how realistic the RPG's world was going to be, one quote became emblematic of his inability to fulfill promises, with him saying that in the game you could plant an acorn and watch it grow into a magnificent oak tree over the course of the title. Obviously, this was not possible at the time. Funnily enough, a lot of the features he boasted about during the production of the original Fable would make their way into the sequel, but by then, nobody cared because he'd already moved on to grander and bigger promises. That would never, of course, come true. Number 5. Metal Gear Solid 5's demonization of Big Boss. The pre-release trailers for Metal Gear Solid 5 promised to chronicle the downfall of Big Boss, finally bridging the prequel trilogy with the modern-day releases. However, although Metal Gear Solid 5 is definitely Big Boss's story, it completely failed to deliver on the descent into hell that the trailers promised. Sure, he does a few questionable things over the course of the game, and there is the small problem of him killing his own men at one point, but his actions are always done for a noble cause, and you never get the feeling that you're controlling a truly bad guy. Combine this with the fact that you're not really playing as the real big boss, and the whole premise just falls on its arse. Whether or not this story would have been followed through on had Kojima not been kicked off the project near its completion is unclear, but even that doesn't quite excuse just why the marketing was so different from the eventual release. Number 4. Arkham Knight's 2 villains. Arkham Knight wasn't only a hugely anticipated title because it was the finale to Rocksteady's Batman trilogy, but also because it was the first time the studio couldn't rely on the Joker to drive its story forward. With the Clown Prince of Crime definitively killed off in the second title, the mantle of Big Bad was passed on to the titular knight for this third game. The studio heads insisted that Batman's arch-nemesis wouldn't be appearing in the game, and that the Arkham Knight himself would be an entirely original character. Of course, both of those promises were well and truly broken the moment players booted up the game. Despite the prologue literally showing the Joker's decaying corpse being cremated, it didn't take long for the villain to actually show up, albeit as a figment of Batman's imagination. Still, he drove the story forward. The Arkham Knight, on the other hand, turned out to not be an original character at all, but the oft-guessed Red Hood, with the developers lying to your face to preserve a twist that everyone guessed months before release. Number 3. Mass Effect 3's A, B, or C ending. Yeah, I know, at this point, 6 years on, complaining about Mass Effect 3's ending is like flogging a dead horse. That said, it would be amiss to do a list like this and not mention the broken promises that made the game so controversial at its initial release. The trouble came because fans were promised a finale that honored their past decisions throughout the entirety of the series so far, that would wrap them up in a neat, personal way. In fact, it was literally promised that the ending wouldn't just boil down to an A, B, or C decision, with everyone's choices coming into play in one form or another to make for wildly divergent endings. Of course, what fans got was literally a choice between A, B, or C that wrapped the story up in 3 specific, pre-defined ways. Of course, it probably would have been impossible to create an ending that respected the individual playthroughs of millions of people across 3 different games, but if the developers could never live up to that, then why on earth promise it? Number 2, No Man's Sky's everything. If we're being honest, there was no way that No Man's Sky would ever live up to the unwieldy expectations that players had for it. And yeah, there's fault on both sides, but the way Sony and Hello Games fanned the flames of these expectations certainly didn't help matters. By being coy in trailers or just lying entirely in trailers, there were plenty of features fans were looking forward to that just didn't materialize in the final release, including multiplayer. The disappointment was felt so thoroughly that after release the game was dubbed No Man's Lie, with fans furious that they'd been misled. Fortunately, the title has pulled itself around and become every bit of the space exploration game it could have been at launch. Number 1. Aliens Colonial Marines Visual Downgrade. There have been few games ever released as disappointing as Aliens Colonial Marines. I can barely even talk about it without getting angry. In development for years, at every opportunity, Gearbox constantly talked up how passionate they were about this monster movie franchise and how excited they were to create an in-canon story set between the events of Aliens and Alien 3. Pre-release trailers seemingly back this up as well, all pointing towards an authentic, beautiful treat that would be the video game adaptation fans had been waiting for years. Of course, it wasn't, was it? In fact, the final experience was probably less enjoyable than having a facehugger literally shag your face off and then an alien burst out of your chest, John Hurt style. Not only was the game itself a buggy mess and include a story that spat all over the movies, but it also became quickly apparent that the gameplay in the pre-release trailers didn't match up at all with what players actually got. Just about everything had been changed, and you can find plenty of comparison videos on YouTube showing just how bad the downgrade was, but why would you want to make yourself sad all over again? So let's have a list. I don't know if you guys can think of any more times that you were misled by video games down in the comments below. And while you're there, can you give us a like, share, subscribe, and all that jazz, and even head over to whatculture.com for even more lists and news like this every single day. Also, you might want to check out a video on 5 video game world records you could actually beat, or try something a little bit different and take our how well do you really know PlayStation quiz. Spoilers, I was completely wrong. Even if you don't though, I've been Josh, you've been watching What Culture, and I'll see you soon. Bye.